So I'm going to give some prolegomena, some sort of initial orientation and an overview of the PCM, and then Gregoire is going to talk about some new developments in the model about relating to epistemic drives and the projective geometrical projective group. And then David is going to talk about some examples. So all of this work can be found in this series of papers. This is sort of the initial one in 2017 up to this one, 2023. So if anyone wants the slides, just let us know, and we can share them with you. So a brief overview of the talk. Not loud enough? A brief overview of the talk. Well, I'll say a little bit about how we conceive of working on consciousness, what theory of consciousness should be. We'll talk about the projective consciousness model as such. We'll talk about, then Gregoire will talk about formal developments, and David will talk about some applications and examples that we've accumulated so far. So, how should you approach the theory of consciousness? In our view, you have to start with some data, some characterization of the phenomenon itself. It's pretty common to divide this into subjective character, which includes things like the point of view, self-consciousness, the notion of a subject, intersubjectivity. Qualitative character, that's our favorite, it's our favorite topic of many people, qualia, qualitativeness. Phenomenal qualities, but also the phenomenal forms, which have a geometrical aspect. And then what I like to call synthetic, or sorry, that should say synchronic and diachronic unities. The integration of all your different modalities into one common space. And then temporality, that has to do with time consciousness. So that's about the data, on the data side of it. And then it has to, all of this consciousness has to have some kind of functional or causal role. Otherwise, we can't really test anything about it. And we believe that these are the sorts of behaviors that have real effects in the real world and therefore testable consequences. If you have a model of it, it will have testable consequences. We believe that consciousness subserves these things, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. So to put it in a nutshell, models of consciousness without phenomenology are blind because their target is too ill-defined or insufficiently specified, or not specified at the right level of abstraction. So if you're just focusing on the content of your pain or something, you're just not going to get very far, right? Or some single quale. Models of consciousness without function are empty because they're beyond meaningful empirical testing. They ask us to imagine that consciousness plays no special role in generating behavior, either because it's epiphenomenal or because it's fundamental. So if you have the view that no, qualitative consciousness is just fundamental, you're going to get the same result, even if you think that somehow that fundamental, that fundamental thing has some kind of internal causal powers or something. Since it's ubiquitous, you're not going to get anything special out of it. So a good model of consciousness then ought to be sensitive to global phenomenological invariance at the appropriate level, characterized at the appropriate level of abstraction, incorporate as many of these invariants as possible, and show how they impact action, generation, and control in an empirically testable way. That's our view. I will say, just as a little footnote, even if you're a panpsychist or you think qualia or fundamental entities or something, you're still going to need a story about the overall phenomenological structure of human consciousness, so you could still benefit from thinking about this kind of model. It's not committed to any particular ontology, but if you do want to make a testable model, you need to get some actual empirical predictions. So the projective consciousness model does precisely this. It combines these two things. So in terms of phenomenology, the main claim is that phenomenal space is structured by projective geometry in 3 dimensions. This has entailments, or it captures certain things about subjective character. It allows you to understand how points of view are formed, the perspectival character of your experience. It basically encodes exactly that. It also allows you to offer an account of self-consciousness because of certain properties of projective spaces, the reciprocity property in particular. And it also provides a basis for intersubjectivity, which intersubjectivity in our view is itself related to subjectivity. So my phenomenal manifold, or my phenomenal field, needs to be a space in which other points of view are possible. And this is a very common thing, right? I need to be able to say, I need to look and, well, we were just trying to figure out how this thing works, right? So what did we do? Or not how it works, but where the little plug-in thing is. So what do? We pick it up, we rotate it, we look at it, we take new points of view on it. Oh, okay, yeah. So by multiplying our, so that means we already knew that there are possible points of view on this object. Same with navigating ambient space, and same with dealing with other people. So if every point in my phenomenal space is a point from which I could be looked at, or from which a point of view could be taken, then suddenly if I get the right cues, oh, it's a face, it's eyes, I go, oh, there is actually someone other than me actualizing that possible point of view. So that's why intersubjectivity is an important feature that this model encodes, partly encodes. In terms of qualitative character, we don't have an account of the redness of red or even color spectra and their structure. So that would this model could be enriched with some account of that. But we do have something to say about the geometrical components. To the extent that geometry affects your overall qualitative experience, things in their relations and your perspectives on them and their transformations and deformations, we do have something to say about that, which is important as well. And then when it comes to synchronic, that should say, and diachronic unities, we have something to say about what you might call the shape of multimodal or supramodal integration. The phenomenal field has a certain kind of structure, and all of your sensory capacities, or sorry, your modalities are integrated into, yes, it's like a global workspace, but we have a kind of model of what the structure of the global workspace is and how it relates to action planning and so on. We have some ideas about how it may relate to temporality, but we won't go into that. In terms of function, the main idea is action planning and control is modulated by projective imagination. So this is your ability, and not just explicit imagination where you try to rotate objects mentally. It's not like that, but that you have the ability to roughly imagine in a very smooth and online way roughly what things would look like from various points of view, and to connect those various points of view to things that might be functional for you. Like it would be easier if we turn the table over, or it would be important to get underneath the car to see. We do these things all the time. We don't even notice it, but we're actually depending on projective transformations in imagination, finding the optimal ones and then pursuing them, or at least ones that are better than what we are dealing with at present. And this has obvious biological significance when you include intersubjectivity. So just think of predators and prey. Prey want to hide so they can't be seen by predators. Predators want to get better vantage points so they can see their prey. And we have connected, up to now, we've kind of connected this, our engine for optimization dynamics has been the free energy principle, or free energy minimization. But I should point out, and sometimes our view is characterized as just another free energy principle theory, and kind of like if that project doesn't work out, then neither does this. But that's not the case, because the projective geometrical component is partly independent of that, even though on any story we tell, our engine for optimization dynamics is going to connect with the projective geometrical component. But we're not deeply wedded to any particular story about optimization dynamics. We are deeply wedded to the projective geometrical component. And when you think about it, when you think about the development of projective geometry and how it was kind of pulled out of people like Albrecht Dürer and others trying to characterize how to draw, the sort of rules for drawing in perspective, it kind of should make sense that, at least at least for the visual field, but we think it applies to more than the visual field, that there should be this connection to projective geometry and the structure of your subjective space. Kind of makes sense when you think about the history of projective geometry, where it came from. Okay, so basically, some form of optimization dynamics modulo the projective group that yields projective imagination and intersubjectivity, which feed into action planning. So there's interaction between both. So just things that we have said something about. I can't go into all of them in detail at this point. I mean, we don't have time, but things that we believe our model accounts for. One is the basic subject-object structure of experience. That it seems relational. A lot of models of consciousness, like IIT and others, just kind of ignore this relational aspect of experience. They don't really think that relationality is essential to consciousness. So in principle, you could then imagine a pain, a phenomenal pain that appears, but it appears to no one. And if you think that's kind of incoherent, like that there could just be a pain that doesn't, then this model might be for you. So if you think, no, experience does have this relational subject-object kind of structure, we have a way of capturing it. It's also why we think that that any kind of experience implicitly has a geometrical characterization, precisely because of this relationality. Notably, I mentioned notably vision because it's the most obvious case. We've got kind of horizon lines and vanishing points. 5 minutes. Yeah, I'm good. We can capture this. We can capture this, the elusiveness of the point of view. Here's the old famous, Ernst Mach drawing his visual field. Well, where is Ernst Mach, right? The subject of experience is elusive. We have a way of capturing the intuition that there is a subject of experience that isn't homuncular. It doesn't postulate a transcendental subject. And it has partly to do with the fact that the origin of projection is outside of the 3 dimensions experienced. We talked about that. Phenomenal space is a space of possible points of view. Reciprocity, that every kind of aiming is also an aiming back, and that helps to ground intersubjectivity. And then we believe we can also account for the possibility of atypical or ambiguous points of view. Atypical as in out-of-body experience, where it seems that the origin of the lived origin of the experience is outside of where it normally is, which is sort of roughly where your auditory and visual ego centers are, roughly. Sometimes can be moved. We can tell a story about how that's possible. And really, the most interesting one to me is heautoscopy, where someone sees themselves like a doppelganger, but unlike an autoscopy where, Linnaeus famously had autoscopic illusions. Oh, there I am working in my office, he would say to his students and things like that. In heautoscopy, you're looking at yourself, as if you're looking in a mirror, kind of like this Groucho Marx thing, but you don't know if you're here looking there or you're here looking there. There's a kind of ambiguity that you can't resolve. We think we can help to account for that, at least account for its possibility. And then pre-reflective self-consciousness, this is the sense that consciousness is always in a certain way aware of itself, though not as an object of reflection or introspection, but there's a degree of implicit or built-in self-awareness, and this has to do, we have a paper on that. I can't go into the details. We have one of our recent papers is entirely about that. So we talked about perceptual navigation via perspective shifting and planning based on what optimal points of view would be, or at least functional points of view. Perspectival imagination, intersubjective navigation. We have to do this together. I have to sort of be aware of what you see and you're aware of what I see. And supramodal / multimodal integration of the entire phenomenal field into a kind of workspace. And then finally, about just one note on the relationship between phenomenology and function. So our view is that the functions that we're carrying out as embodied organisms acting in the real world is mediated and facilitated by the phenomenological structure. Why does consciousness have the structure it has? Why does it have this projective structure? Because that facilitates the carrying out of these functions, especially for social organisms in a complex world where they've got to move around and multiply points of view on things to do anything. And on the flip side, phenomenology includes pretty clear evidence of these functions, because all of these examples I've been giving you should be completely familiar. We do this kind of stuff all the time. Basic Bayesian perceptual updating to resolve uncertainties involve this all the time, right? And there are many, many more examples. So now I'm going to turn it over to Gregoire, who's going to talk about some recent formal developments.